The primary test. The first fully immersive psychological override. And you exceeded every expectation. Rachel tried to speak, but her mouth felt numb, her voice barely a whisper. Her mind was screaming. She remembered Christmas mornings, bedtime stories, long walks through the park. Every memory of her father filtered now through the sickening realization that they were part of an experiment. None of it had been real. Or maybe worse, it had been real to her, but never to him. "Why?" she finally croaked. "Why would you do this to me?" He tilted his head slightly, almost as if he pitied her. "Because this is the future. War is messy. Spies are unreliable. But psychological control? Emotional loyalty built in from childhood? That's perfect obedience. You were my proof of concept." The rage that tore through her body was enough to override the drugs, at least for a few seconds. Rachel yanked hard against the restraints, her eyes wild with fury. "Where is Emily?" she demanded, her voice hoarse. "What did you do to her?" Mason simply tapped a keypad, and a screen descended from the ceiling. It displayed a live feed. Emily, asleep in what looked like a nursery, soft music playing in the background, a woman sitting beside her humming a lullaby. "She's safe," he said, "for now. We've given her a different environment.
Clean.
Stable. She won't remember you, but she'll be happy. And that's all that matters, isn't it?" The calmness in his voice made Rachel want to tear her skin off. It wasn't just manipulation, it was control perfected. And then the room's lights flickered. A sudden crash echoed from the hallway outside. An alarm blared. The facility was under attack. Chaos erupted in the control room behind the glass as masked intruders stormed in, guns drawn. One of them tossed a flash drive to the floor beside Rachel's bed, then shot the lock on her restraints. It was Vanessa, bloodied but breathing, eyes fierce. "You still want the truth?" she said, panting. "Then come see where they built it." Rachel followed her through corridors she didn't recognize until they reached a massive underground vault. Inside were rows and rows of tanks, each containing a suspended human body, hooked up to machines, pulses visible through translucent skin. "Test subjects," Vanessa said. "They've been growing them, cloning behavior patterns, neural mapping, emotional templates. You weren't the only prototype. You were just the one they kept close, the one they raised to believe the lie." As Rachel moved deeper into the room, she saw one tank that made her freeze. Floating inside was a perfect copy of her, same face, same scar above the eyebrow from that bike fall when she was 8. "That's not you," Vanessa said, reading her reaction. "That's the original." The realization hit her like a freight train. She wasn't born. She was made. Every memory, every feeling, every heartbreak had been programmed, implanted, tailored to test how closely artificial emotional development could mirror the real thing. The father she'd loved wasn't her creator. He was her programmer. The daughter she'd sworn to protect was never biologically hers. And yet, Rachel had loved. She had fought. She had felt, deeply, painfully, powerfully, more than a machine ever should. That's when she understood. The real failure of Project Marionette wasn't that she broke the system. It was that she became human. Outside, sirens screamed and gunfire erupted. The resistance had infiltrated the entire base. Mason's voice crackled over the speakers. "Rachel, if you destroy this, you destroy yourself. You were never meant to know. You'll lose everything.
Come home.
Let me fix this." But Rachel walked to the terminal, inserted the flash drive, and triggered the final protocol. Every hard drive, every camera, every tank, all corrupted, all erased. The system crashed around them, sending sparks through the ceiling. Rachel looked at Vanessa, who was already prepping their escape route. "What happens now?" she asked. Vanessa gave a tired smile. "Now we live." They escaped through a maintenance tunnel just seconds before the facility self-destructed, the shockwave lighting up the night sky behind them. But just as Rachel turned to get one last look, her phone buzzed again. A new message. No number. Just 5 words. Version 3 is already active. And in that moment, Rachel realized the program had never ended. It had just moved on. Rachel sat alone at the edge of a lake that shimmered gold beneath the setting sun, the wind threading softly through her hair as if the world itself had finally exhaled. The smoke, the gunfire, the screams from the compound, those were behind her now, like echoes from someone else's nightmare. A part of her wanted to believe that she had escaped, that she had outrun the shadow cast by her past, but deep inside, she knew that some scars never fully fade. Her body still carried the memory of the wires, the needles, the code buried in her blood. And her heart, fractured but still beating, held on to questions she no longer had the strength to chase. Emily was safe now, truly safe, living with a distant relative under a new identity, far away from the ruins of Project Marionette. She wouldn't remember Rachel. The programming had ensured that. But maybe that was a gift, freedom without the weight of lies. Rachel had watched her play one last time from a distance, a smile dancing on the little girl's face as she chased Bubbles in the yard, innocent and unaware of the world that had tried to use her as a pawn. The world believed the facility was destroyed, the conspiracy unraveled, and the masterminds either dead or in hiding. The media labeled it as a tragic explosion at an off-grid research center. No one questioned too much. After all, who would dare dig deeper into classified government files sealed behind layers of red tape? But Rachel had the files now, copied and secured, with names, locations, methods, all the evidence that could bring an entire network crashing down. The question was whether to use it. Vanessa thought they should leak it all. Blow the whole damn thing wide open, she'd said with fire in her eyes. Let people see what they're really funding. But Rachel wasn't sure anymore. The truth had a cost, and she'd paid it in full. For every person they exposed, there were 10 more ready to replace them. The real enemy wasn't just the agency, it was the idea that people could be built, emotions engineered, lives scripted from the womb. She often found herself looking into the mirror now, not searching for flaws, but for signs of something real, something untouched by the experiment. She'd asked herself 1,000 times, if I was created, does that make me less human? The answer had come not in words, but in choices. She'd chosen to fight, to love, to protect, to destroy the thing that made her. And in those choices, she found her humanity, messy, broken, beautiful. Her father's last words still haunted her, not because of what they revealed, but because of the tone he said them in, regret. Somewhere, buried beneath the arrogance and control, there had been love, or at least the twisted echo of it. And now he was gone, a ghost locked in her neural map, unreachable and unredeemable. One rainy morning, she received a small package at the doorstep of her temporary cabin. It started like any ordinary Tuesday. Clear skies, morning coffee, and the usual hum of a quiet suburban street in rural Illinois. Nothing about that day screamed danger, or darkness, or anything close to what detectives were about to uncover. In fact, if you were standing outside the Harris family's neatly kept home, you might think it belonged on the cover of a home and garden magazine. But behind that white picket fence, behind the bright red front door, a secret had been festering, one so disturbing that even seasoned police officers, the kind who've seen it all, were left speechless. You're not just here for another mystery story. You're here for the truth that no one ever thought would see the light of day. A truth that will hit you harder than you expect, because it's not just about crime. It's about what a father is capable of hiding right under everyone's nose. Now listen closely, because what you're about to hear will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about family, about trust, and about the thin line that separates normalcy from nightmare. I'm not just here to tell you a story. I'm here to take you inside it. You're going to walk through the front door of that house, sit at that dinner table, feel the weight of the silence that used to mean peace but now feels more like warning. You came here for answers, and by the end of this video, you'll get them. But only if you stay with me. Because every detail matters. Every glance, every whisper, every gut feeling someone ignored. You're not just watching a video. You're investigating alongside the detectives. You're inside the mind of the people involved. And the more you understand that, the closer you'll get to solving this case. This isn't one of those stories you half-watch while scrolling your phone. You're going to feel this. You're going to imagine yourself in their shoes because it could have been your neighbor, your coworker, even someone in your own family. And that's what makes this case hit so hard. This is real, and it's terrifyingly possible. In a world where people can fake smiles, play the perfect parent, and still commit acts so disturbing they rattle entire communities, this story is the wake-up call no one saw coming. And yes, you're going to get the answer to the mystery that brought you here. The chilling twist behind this father's dark secret. But to truly understand it, to truly feel the weight of it, you have to go through the journey. Let me set the scene for you. David Harris was a man most would call dependable. He had a solid job in tech, a beautiful wife, 2 kids who were always polite at school functions, and a presence in the community that made him feel safe to be around. Church on Sundays, block parties in the summer, always the first to lend a hand when someone's car broke down or when a neighbor needed help moving. The perfect dad, right? Except, behind the closed doors of his home, David wasn't the man anyone thought he was. And no one, not his wife, not his coworkers, not even his closest friends, could have guessed what he was hiding in that basement. This wasn't just a man with a few secrets. This was a man who led a double life, and when it all unraveled, it left a trail of shock, betrayal, and horror that gripped the entire town. This story explores the darkest parts of the human mind. The kind of darkness that doesn't show up on social media or in polite conversations. The kind that lurks in silence, in carefully deleted files, in locked drawers no one is supposed to open. And when the truth finally came out, it wasn't a dramatic confession or a slip-up in conversation. It was a silent scream discovered by accident, a crack in the facade that exposed everything. And once police dug deeper, they realized they weren't dealing with a misunderstanding or a moment of weakness. They were dealing with premeditation, with control, with manipulation on a level that shakes even the most experienced detectives. I need you to imagine this. You're a detective responding to a simple call, a welfare check, nothing serious. Maybe someone missed a shift at work, didn't return a few texts. Happens all the time, right? But the moment you step into the Harris home, something feels off. It's not just the eerie quiet, or the way the air seems heavier in the hallway. It's the way the family photos on the wall don't match the feeling in the room. The way the kitchen table is perfectly clean, yet the trash hasn't been taken out in days. And then there's the basement door, slightly ajar, even though the wife always said David kept it locked. What you find down there changes everything. And no, I'm not just teasing for the sake of it. You're going to see exactly what was uncovered. You're going to understand what made officers call for backup within minutes. You're going to feel that drop in your stomach when you realize how far someone can go to keep a secret buried. We're going to talk about digital footprints, hidden surveillance, manipulation, and how one father fooled not just his family, but an entire community. We'll break down interviews, examine police reports, and look at the psychological patterns that made this father's mask so convincing. And yes, we're going to hear from those closest to him, people who are still trying to piece together how they missed the signs. I want you to ask yourself, could I have seen this coming? Would I have believed it if it was someone I knew? These aren't just rhetorical questions, they're part of the journey you and I are taking together right now. This story also taps into trending true crime themes, hidden cameras, double lives, family secrets, and psychological manipulation. These are topics that dominate today's YouTube search trends because they reflect the very fears we keep in the back of our minds. The fear that someone we trust might not be who they say they are. The fear that there's a part of someone we love that we never truly knew. And it's stories like this, raw, emotional, deeply human, that keep us watching because deep down, we want to believe we could spot the monster. We want to believe we'd see through the lies. But as you're about to learn, the real danger comes when the monster doesn't look like one. The deeper we go into this case, the more disturbing the details become. This isn't just about what was found in the basement, it's about what those findings meant. What they revealed about years of deceit, about the psychological control David held over the people closest to him. The quiet power he used to keep everyone fooled. And more importantly, the way it all started to crumble. The chilling moment someone finally saw a clue that didn't fit. A detail so small, it could have been brushed off. But that tiny moment became the spark that blew the lid off a case that's now etched into local law enforcement history. As you watch, you'll notice how carefully David planned every aspect of his life to cover his tracks. But even the most calculated criminals slip up. And that's exactly what happened here. The mistake that exposed his entire world wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, insidious. And as you see how it unfolded, I guarantee you'll feel that same rush of realization the detectives felt. That moment when the pieces finally click together and the truth comes into full view. And when it does, it's not just shocking, it's heartbreaking. Because it shows how easily trust can be weaponized. How someone can use love as a cover, routine as a shield, and normalcy as camouflage for the unimaginable. But because the way it was discovered is unlike anything you've heard before. This isn't the kind of story that fades from memory, it lingers. It makes you question what's real. And the next time someone tells you everything's fine, you might just take a second look. So buckle up, stay with me, and remember, you're going to get every answer you came here for. But first, you need to see what the officers saw. You need to feel what they felt when they opened that basement door and stepped into a secret that would forever change their definition of evil. And just when you think you've seen the worst of it, that's when the real twist hits. You're not going to want to miss what happens next. Not just because the secret itself is disturbing. To be continued. David Harris wasn't the kind of man who drew attention. He kept a low profile, made small talk when necessary, and stayed out of other people's business. In a town where gossip traveled faster than the morning news, David had somehow managed to remain both visible and invisible at the same time. If you asked anyone in the neighborhood about him, they'd tell you the same thing. Nice guy, good dad, kept himself. He volunteered for his kids' science fair, donated to local shelters around Thanksgiving, and even brought extra chairs to the 4th of July barbecue in the park. But beneath that polished image, something didn't quite add up. Over the past few months, there had been subtle changes. David started working longer hours at his home office, even on weekends. He disconnected the family's smart home cameras, claiming they were causing Wi-Fi issues. His wife, Rachel, mentioned to a close friend that he'd become distant, not cold, just distracted, like his mind was always somewhere else. Their teenage daughter, Emily, quietly started locking her bedroom door at night, though she never said why. None of it screamed danger at the time. But looking back now, those small changes feel like cracks in the surface, warning signs everyone missed. Behind the scenes, David had taken an unusual interest in true crime podcasts and unsolved cases, something he chalked up to curiosity. He'd often stay up late reading dark forums online, diving into the psychology of criminals, serial killers, and digital manipulation. He said it was for a writing project he was thinking of starting. No one thought twice about it. After all, plenty of people were into true crime these days. But it wasn't just research. It was a window into something deeper, an obsession with control, strategy, and the power of deception. Detectives would later find dozens of private files and folders buried in encrypted drives, some detailing criminal patterns, others tracking his own actions down to the minute. He was journaling, documenting, and categorizing behavior, not of others but of himself. And that discovery would become one of the most disturbing elements of the investigation. He wasn't spiraling. He was calculating. The deeper police dug, the more questions they had. Why did David stop attending family therapy 6 months ago, just after a minor argument with Rachel that seemed inconsequential at the time? Why did he purchase a second phone, which no one in the household even knew existed? And why did a man with no criminal record have a growing list of encrypted accounts tied to fake identities? Investigators initially wondered if he was leading a double life, maybe an affair, maybe secret debts. But the truth wasn't that simple. Every lead opened a new door, but instead of clarity, they found contradictions. Rachel insisted David hadn't left the house on the night in question. But security footage from a neighbor's camera showed someone matching his build leaving just after midnight. When questioned, he claimed he'd gone out for a walk to clear his head, but no footprints, no GPS, and no witness ever confirmed it. Then came the tip from an anonymous caller. A man's voice, muffled and urgent, said only one sentence before hanging up. "You need to check the crawl space." That single line pushed the case from unsettling to urgent. Officers returned to the Harris home and began a second, deeper search. Nothing in the crawlspace stood out at first, just insulation, tools, and old boxes. But tucked between the floor joists, hidden behind a makeshift panel, they found a locked metal case. Inside were USB drives, printed documents, and, most disturbing of all, photographs. None illegal, but all deeply unsettling. Images of his family taken from odd angles at odd times, sleeping, cooking, unaware. Surveillance-style photos that suggested more than just paranoia. They suggested intent. But what was that intent? Was David preparing for something? Was he documenting his life in a way that made sense only to him? Or was this part of something darker, more orchestrated than anyone could imagine? As news of the investigation spread, so did speculation. The local Facebook groups lit up with theories, some pointing to Rachel, claiming her sudden silence was a sign of guilt. Others focused on Emily, noting her recent withdrawal from friends and extracurriculars. And then there was the neighbor, Paul Jenkins, a retired firefighter who lived alone and often argued with David about property lines. Some believed he had it out for David and planted the evidence. The theories were endless, each more bizarre than the last. But detectives had to separate noise from truth, and the truth was buried under layers of lies, half-facts, and carefully constructed routines that David had perfected over time. Adding to the complexity, David's employer revealed something unexpected during questioning. Apparently, he had recently submitted a request for indefinite remote work, citing family reasons. But his work performance had declined, and his supervisor had noticed a shift in his demeanor, missed deadlines, brief flashes of anger, and erratic communication. Even more telling, company IT logs showed several attempts to access restricted files that had nothing to do with his role. When confronted, David denied everything, claiming it was a glitch. But the logs didn't lie. And buried in one of his private emails was a message he never sent, saved as a draft. "They won't believe me unless they see it for themselves." No one knew what it meant or who they were. But the tone was desperate, almost like he was preparing for something big. What made this case so chilling wasn't just what police found, it was what they couldn't explain. Why did a man with no history of violence seem to be preparing for something secretive and sinister? Why did his wife seem so calm during interviews, almost too calm, as if she'd known something she wasn't ready to share? And why, despite all the evidence piling up, did David maintain that he hadn't done anything wrong? Every answer led to more confusion. Every fact had a shadow. And while the community debated, speculated, and spiraled into conspiracy, the detectives were running out of time. Because they'd just learned that David had visited a storage unit on the edge of town, a unit registered under a false name. What they found inside would change everything, but they didn't know that yet. All they knew was that the deeper they went, the less they could trust anything they thought they knew about this case. And then came the strangest twist of all. An old friend of David's, someone who hadn't seen him in over a decade, came forward with a story. Apparently, back in college, David had become fascinated with psychological manipulation experiments. They don't leave behind notes or dramatic outbursts. They hide in plain sight, slowly building a world only they can understand. And when that world finally collides with reality, the result isn't just shocking, it's devastating. But just when the detectives thought they had seen the worst of it, when they believed they were finally beginning to understand David's twisted world, a new piece of evidence surfaced that would send the case spiraling in an entirely different direction. A clue so unexpected, so out of place, it changed the very foundation of the investigation. And that's where the real nightmare began. A personal project gone too far? Or was David simply unraveling, losing control in the quietest, most dangerous way possible? You see, that's the thing about people like David. They don't break in obvious ways. At the time, no one took it seriously. But now, those old conversations seemed like breadcrumbs leading back to the mind of a man who may have been planning something for much longer than anyone realized. Was this all part of some long-form experiment? He even participated in underground forums discussing thought control and behavioral redirection. Just 2 days after detectives uncovered the disturbing contents of David's secret storage unit, a collection of blueprints, coded notebooks, and surveillance footage that suggested meticulous, years-long planning, another bombshell dropped that sent shockwaves through the investigation. Rachel's younger sister, Vanessa, who lived over 100 miles away in a quiet suburb of Denver, contacted authorities in a panic. She'd just received a handwritten envelope in her mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single Polaroid photo, grainy, dimly lit, but unmistakably real. The image showed her and her son at a public park, a moment she didn't remember being photographed. What chilled her to the bone, though, was the back of the photo. Scrawled in shaky penmanship were the words, "You were never just watching him. He was watching you." At first, local police suspected it was a sick prank. But when investigators traced the type of film used, it matched precisely with one of the vintage cameras found in David's storage unit. Vanessa had no idea she was ever on his radar. She hadn't spoken to David in over 6 years, not since a small falling out at a family reunion. So why now? Why her? And more disturbingly, was this meant to be a warning or a threat? This new development didn't just widen the scope of the investigation, it cracked it open entirely. If David had been surveilling people outside his immediate family, it suggested a far deeper pathology than they originally believed. Detectives began to sift through the mountains of footage from the storage unit, cross-referencing every face, every location, every timestamp. That's when they found something that turned everything on its head. One grainy frame, buried deep in a reel labeled discarded, showed a figure entering David's home late one night while the rest of the house appeared asleep. The silhouette was familiar, too familiar. It wasn't Rachel, and it wasn't Emily. After a forensic enhancement, the image revealed what looked like Paul Jenkins, the neighbor who'd previously accused David of trespassing on his property. But there was no reported break-in, no alarm triggered, no missing items. Just an unexplained visit that nobody had acknowledged. When questioned again, Paul denied ever setting foot inside the Harris home, claiming the image must have been doctored. But his reaction, his sudden shift in tone, his anxious glances at the detectives, spoke louder than his words. Now, instead of one man's descent into madness, the possibility of collusion began to emerge. Was Paul just a nosy neighbor, or something far more involved? Complicating things further, one of the detectives assigned to the case, Detective Alana Ruiz, made a quiet discovery she kept off the official record, at least for now. While combing through David's cloud backup, which had been meticulously hidden behind layers of proxy servers, she found an audio file. It was unlabeled, unindexed, and deeply encrypted. After days of painstaking decryption, she finally opened it, and what she heard stopped her cold. It was a recorded phone call between David and an unknown male voice, discussing a test run, a stage 2, and a phrase repeated multiple times. The projection is holding. The tone was calm, emotionless, calculated. They weren't talking about a crime of passion or a spontaneous act of violence. They were talking about a process, a system. And the voice on the other end? It wasn't robotic or distorted. It was human, articulate, even charismatic. The kind of voice that could lead people, influence them, convince them of impossible things. The kind of voice that didn't belong to a loner spiraling in isolation. This wasn't just David. There was someone else involved. Someone who might still be out there. Someone watching. With every new clue, the story became less about what David had done and more about what he was part of. The media ran wild with speculation, spitting out trending hashtags like #SuburbanPsycho, #FamilySurveillance, #DarkSideOfDad, and the more ominous #Stage 2 is coming. Reddit threads lit up overnight with theories about secret societies, cult-like experiments, mind control, and hidden messages buried in David's code. A TikTok creator with over 1 million followers claimed they found a cipher in one of David's journal entries that translated into GPS coordinates pointing to a remote part of the Colorado wilderness. Another influencer, famous for deep-diving true crime mysteries, released a 45-minute video suggesting David had been part of an underground think tank experimenting with cognitive behavioral warfare. The internet couldn't get enough. But for investigators, the lines between truth, fiction, and manipulation were blurring fast, and the stakes were getting higher. Then, just when they thought the chaos had peaked, Rachel made an unexpected request. She asked to speak with Detective Ruiz alone, without lawyers, without media. In a private room at the precinct, she sat silently for over 2 minutes before finally speaking. Her voice was calm, but her eyes betrayed something deeper. Fear, maybe guilt, or maybe exhaustion. She revealed that several months ago, she found a sealed envelope tucked into the back of David's desk drawer. She never told anyone. Inside was a letter addressed to her in David's handwriting. The contents? A cryptic message. If they come asking questions, tell them it was all my fault. Even if you don't believe it. Especially if you don't. Rachel said she burned the letter that same night. She didn't know why, only that something about it felt wrong. Not just the words, but the way they were written. Like David wasn't warning her. He was prepping her. Programming her. And suddenly, she began to question everything she thought she knew about her husband and about herself. The case was no longer just a crime scene or a psychological profile. It was a living puzzle. Every person connected to David Harris was now under the microscope, including his daughter Emily, who had begun having recurring nightmares about being watched from inside the walls. Child psychologists chalked it up to trauma, but a quiet voice in the back of Detective Ruiz's mind kept whispering, what if it wasn't just a dream? What if Emily saw something or someone? And just when the team thought the threads of the mystery couldn't twist any tighter, a final piece of evidence arrived. And that's exactly what made it so terrifying. You said. Rachel didn't sleep for more than an hour that night. Even with every light in the house turned on and her phone clenched in her hand under the covers, sleep remained a stranger. The video on that flash drive haunted her more than she could admit, even to herself. Watching it once was enough to change something in her, but watching it a second time, the look in her own eyes, the eerie stillness in her body, shook her down to her bones. She didn't remember that moment. She had no memory of standing in the kitchen, staring at a camera that, by all accounts, she never knew existed. It wasn't just a disturbing coincidence. It felt like a fracture in her reality. And now, every shadow looked suspicious. Every noise in the walls, every flicker in the corner of her vision, felt like something, or someone, was still watching. Her trust in her memories began to corrode, peeling away layer by layer. She questioned the truth not only of her past, but of her present. What else had she done that she didn't remember? The next morning, as the sun rose dim behind gray clouds, Rachel went to check on Emily, who had been sleeping in her room down the hall. Her heart was thudding harder with every step, not because she expected her daughter to be gone, but because a new, irrational fear had begun to root itself deep inside her. What if Emily wasn't who she thought she was? When she gently opened the bedroom door, the bed was empty. The sheets were still tucked in, undisturbed. No sign of a struggle. No note. No explanation. Rachel's blood turned to ice. She ran through the house, screaming her daughter's name, checking the bathrooms, closets, garage. Nothing. Emily was just gone. Vanished. She called Detective Ruiz, barely able to form words. Within 20 minutes, the house was surrounded by law enforcement. They combed the perimeter, canvassed the neighborhood, even brought in K9 units to track the girl's scent. But there was no sign of a break-in, no forced entry, no evidence that Emily had ever left the house at all. That night, Rachel sat alone in the kitchen where the video had been recorded, clutching the edge of the table with white knuckles. Every creak of the house sent her nerves on edge. She felt like she was unraveling, like reality was shifting just out of reach. The walls felt closer, the silence louder. She kept replaying the last few weeks, David's arrest, the footage, Vanessa's mysterious photo, the flash drive, and none of it added up. And then, like a whisper inside her mind, a thought surfaced that she hadn't dared consider before. What if David wasn't lying? What if this wasn't just about him being dangerous, but about him protecting them from something far worse? Could everything they'd found, the recordings, the codes, the cryptic notes, have been part of something bigger? Something beyond just one man's delusions? And now, with Emily gone, Rachel feared the answer wasn't just yes, but that it might already be too late. As night deepened, another twist hit harder than anything yet. A manila envelope was slipped under Rachel's front door. No sound, no knock, no doorbell. Just silence. Inside was a series of photographs, printed on glossy paper, each time-stamped from within the last 24 hours. They showed Rachel sitting in her car outside the police station, walking back from the grocery store, crying in her living room. She hadn't seen anyone. She hadn't noticed a car following her. But someone had been watching, closely, intimately. The final photo in the stack was what made her knees buckle. It was a picture of Emily. But not from that morning. It was taken in what looked like an unfamiliar basement. She was lying on a mattress, eyes open, staring into the lens. There was no visible bruising, no sign of distress. But there was also no sign of where she was being held. Just one detail stood out. In the corner of the photo, drawn crudely on the wall in black marker, was the phrase, "Phase 2 complete." The word sent a chill through Rachel's entire body. Phase 2. The same phrase used in that decrypted call between David and the unidentified man. It wasn't just a phrase anymore. It was a signal, a stage, a chilling confirmation that someone else was still in control. Someone had taken Emily. And they weren't asking for ransom. They weren't making demands. They were playing a game. Or worse, conducting an experiment. That was when Rachel realized she couldn't trust the police, the media, or even her own instincts. This wasn't a conventional crime. This wasn't a matter of finding a runaway or catching a kidnapper. It was deeper, structured,
Planned.
and Rachel now suspected that the only person who could unravel this mystery, the only one who ever understood its true scale, was the man she had helped put behind bars. David Harris. And just before Rachel could even process what her next move might be, her cell phone buzzed. Unknown number. Against every rational instinct, she answered. On the other end, a voice she didn't recognize said only one thing: "You can't save her by staying where it's safe." Then the call disconnected. No trace. No clues. Just an echo of something that felt both like a warning and a threat. And in that moment, Rachel understood something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. This wasn't just about her daughter being taken. This was about being pulled into something far more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. A web of manipulation, surveillance, and psychological torment that extended far beyond her family. And the deeper she went, the more she realized the truth wasn't just hidden. It was engineered. And the worst part? She might have already been part of it all along, without even knowing. Rachel sat in her car outside the prison for nearly an hour, engine idling, hands trembling over the wheel as she tried to summon the nerve to walk through those gates. She had come to see David, not out of desperation, but out of necessity. Everything pointed back to him, and after receiving that chilling photo of Emily with the phrase "Phase 2 complete" scrawled behind her, Rachel knew she was running out of time. The police were still treating her like a distressed mother spiraling under pressure, and even Detective Ruiz, who once seemed like an ally, was growing colder and more distant with each new call. She couldn't shake the suspicion that they were keeping something from her. It was the same gnawing feeling she had when David would come home from his work trips, speaking in vague sentences and giving her that same flat smile that never quite reached his eyes.
She had ignored it then.
She couldn't afford to ignore it now. When she was finally allowed into the visiting room, David looked different. Not unkempt, not haggard, just oddly serene. As if he had been expecting her. As if everything had gone exactly the way he planned. That was the first moment Rachel realized she may have been wrong about everything. He leaned forward, chained hands resting gently on the metal table, and with a quiet intensity that chilled her, he said, "I told them you wouldn't believe me until they took her. Now that you're listening, are you ready to hear the truth?" Rachel's mouth went dry. Every word he spoke next chipped away at the foundation she thought she had built. According to David, he hadn't been running from justice or hiding dark secrets. He'd been trying to protect the family from an underground experiment known as Project Marionette. A brown padded envelope, mailed anonymously to the local station, containing a single item, a flash drive. On it was a looping video, silent, 30 seconds long, shot from a hidden camera inside the Harris house. The footage showed Rachel, alone in the kitchen, staring directly at the lens. Not startled, not confused, just watching.
As if she knew it was there the whole time.
Nothing was making sense anymore. She had no memory of writing a single page, but the handwriting was undeniably hers. That was when the phone rang. Another unknown number. A woman's voice this time.
Calm. Precise.
The truth is never what it seems, Rachel. The real question is, if we erased your past to protect the mission, are you sure you even want it back? The line went dead. The entries spoke of tests, reactions, behavioral triggers. They referenced Emily as Subject Delta 5. One entry even stated, David growing suspicious. May need to isolate subject again. Reintegration plan failing. And then, as if the world hadn't shifted violently enough beneath her feet, Rachel received a package when she returned home. No return address. Inside was a worn composition notebook filled with entries in her own handwriting, dates, locations, observations, all written in a tone she didn't recognize as her own. She was selected, groomed, and you were the perfect candidate to raise her because you were one of the early subjects. Rachel's entire body went numb. David wasn't claiming Emily had been kidnapped for leverage or revenge. He was saying the entire family dynamic had been manufactured from the moment they brought Emily home. The organization behind Project Marionette had orchestrated everything. The sweet moments, the milestones, the medical scares. None of it had been chance. And Rachel stood in the middle of her kitchen, surrounded by fragments of a life that suddenly felt like someone else's invention. Everything she believed, everything she loved, everything she feared, it had all been manipulated. She was no longer sure what was real, who she could trust, or even who she really was. And for the first time since this nightmare began, she understood the real terror wasn't in losing her daughter. It was in realizing that she might have already lost herself. And she couldn't help but wonder, what if that was always the point? Rachel stood in front of the mirror in her dimly lit bathroom, hands pressed flat against the countertop as she stared into her own eyes, searching for something, anything, that resembled the woman she thought she was. But nothing felt familiar anymore. Her reflection looked like a stranger, hollowed out and exhausted, with questions flickering in her gaze like static on an old television. The weight of the notebook, the photos, the audio files, and David's confession pressed on her like a physical force, and every piece of her world now felt like part of a puzzle designed to break her. But there was no time to grieve the life she once thought was hers. Emily was still missing, and if even a fraction of what David had said was true, Rachel was on borrowed time. That night, Rachel drove to the outskirts of town, following the GPS coordinates handwritten on a sticky note inside the notebook, coordinates that hadn't been there the night before. She wasn't sure how the note had appeared. Maybe she wrote it in another blackout. Maybe someone left it. Maybe it was always there, hidden between pages, only accessible when the light hit at just the right angle. The location led her to a shuttered industrial facility, the kind of place that once buzzed with blue-collar grit, but now sat abandoned, surrounded by rusted fences and forgotten history. She parked a block away and walked in silence, the only sound being her boots crunching over gravel. The building loomed like a ghost from a different life. Inside, the darkness swallowed her whole until a motion-activated light flickered on overhead, revealing a man she hadn't seen in years, her brother, James. James had vanished after their mother's funeral. No goodbye, no explanation, just an empty apartment and a disconnected number. And now here he was, standing casually like he had expected her all along, dressed in tactical gear with the calm demeanor of someone who had stopped fearing consequences a long time ago. Rachel's throat went dry as he looked at her and said, "You weren't supposed to find out this way." Her mind reeled. He had been in her house growing up, had held Emily when she was still in diapers, had laughed with them over Thanksgiving dinners. And now he was standing in what looked like a surveillance hub, surrounded by monitors, maps, and boxes labeled with government insignias. He explained that he had been working for a private intelligence contractor involved with the same shadow operation that David had described. Project Marionette was real, and worse, it was still active. James laid it all out like it was a business deal. Rachel had been selected not because she was weak, but because she was adaptable, controllable. "You were never meant to be a victim," he said. "You were part of the field team until your memory was wiped. You signed up for this, Rachel. You agreed." She backed away, her hands shaking violently because that phrase, "you agreed," triggered something deep inside her. A flash. A sterile white room. A signature on a screen. She remembered screaming, not in pain, but in terror and then silence. James then offered her what he called a way out. If she cooperated, played her role again, they would ensure Emily's safety. The child would be reintegrated into a different family, given a new identity, and would be monitored but unharmed. But if Rachel resisted, if she went public, involved the media, or tried to run, they would activate failsafes. There would be no trace of Emily. No rescue. Just disappearance. The choice broke Rachel in half. Her instincts as a mother clashed violently with the realization that she may have been a participant in something unspeakable. She was being forced to choose between fighting for a daughter who may have never truly belonged to her, or sacrificing that daughter's future to preserve what was left of her own sanity. And even worse, James pulled out a file and dropped it on the table in front of her. Inside were photographs of Vanessa, her best friend, taken only days ago, speaking to a man in a government vehicle. "She's been your handler this whole time," he said. "Every time you broke down, she was there to steer you. Every time you got close to the truth, she redirected you. You were never alone."
Not really.
Rachel wanted to scream, to collapse, to run, but her body felt frozen, like her mind was processing too much to command movement. She stared at the images of Vanessa, betrayal burning through every inch of her skin. Her confidant, her emotional anchor, the only person who had believed her when others didn't, now exposed as someone who had been quietly pulling strings behind her back. James handed her a burner phone and gave her a deadline. Midnight tomorrow. That's when they expect an answer. Choose the program, and Emily lives. Fight it, and they erase both of you. That night, Rachel returned home to find the notebook open on the table again. But something new had been added, a small folded slip of paper, not in her handwriting, with one simple line. "Remember who you were before they rewrote you." She stared at it for hours, unable to sleep, unable to breathe without feeling like her chest was being crushed by the impossible. "They've expanded the program." Rachel didn't speak, just gripped the knife tighter, her fingers white-knuckled. Vanessa continued, her voice trembling. "Your neighborhood. Your coworkers. Some of your neighbors are agents. The school Emily went to? Funded by a shell corporation tied to the same operation. There are hundreds of children families being used. You weren't the only one implanted. You're just the one who woke up first." That's when Rachel felt her knees buckle. The conspiracy wasn't just a twisted psychological test. She raised her hand slowly, showing she had nothing on her. "I didn't know it would go this far," she said. "I thought it was just surveillance, low-level behavior studies. But it's not just you, Rachel. It's everyone." She had until midnight to find out. Rachel didn't remember falling asleep, but she woke up to the sound of her front door creaking open, a slow, deliberate noise that yanked her out of a restless dream and into stark, chilling reality. The lights were off, but moonlight spilled across the hardwood floor, casting fractured shadows through the living room. Her breath caught as she reached instinctively for the knife tucked beneath the couch cushion. She'd started sleeping downstairs, too afraid to be far from the door, too paranoid to feel safe in her own bedroom. She stepped forward, heart pounding in her ears, and then she saw the silhouette of a figure standing in the kitchen, still, watching her. "It's me," the voice whispered. "Vanessa." Rachel's stomach dropped. The betrayal was still too fresh. Seeing Vanessa now, standing in the very space where they once laughed over wine and shared secrets, felt like a sick joke. Vanessa looked tired, disheveled, her eyes red as if she'd been crying. The lost time. The footage of her staring blankly into the camera. The strange way Emily had begun waking up crying, saying things like, "The voices told me to stay quiet." And then David dropped the twist that shattered her. You think they took Emily to hurt us? He asked. No, Rachel. She was the experiment. From the beginning. The adoption agency, the pediatrician, the nightly sleep monitors, they were part of it. A Black Ops psychological conditioning program designed to erase memories and implant behaviors. Rachel blinked in disbelief, thinking it sounded insane, until he leaned back and said, You think that flash drive just appeared out of nowhere? I left it where I knew you'd find it. I needed you to see what they were doing to you. And somewhere deep inside, she began to wonder if the real truth wasn't in finding Emily, but in uncovering the person she used to be before the lies began. The question was, would she like the person she used to be? Or would that be the final betrayal? Rachel wanted to scream, to accuse him of trying to manipulate her again, but there were too many pieces that lined up. It was a nationwide operation disguised as normal life. Schools, hospitals, even therapy groups had been converted into quiet extensions of behavioral labs. Entire communities were part of the data collection effort. Rachel remembered the oddly robotic responses from her boss when she called out sick, the neighbor who always asked too many questions but never seemed to listen to the answers, the school nurse who insisted Emily's sleepwalking was developmentally normal. It all clicked. None of them had been real participants in her life. They had been assigned roles in her constructed reality. Project Marionette wasn't an experiment. It was an infrastructure. And then Vanessa handed her something small, a flash drive. This has everything. Surveillance footage, program rosters, internal comms. But they know I took it. They'll come after both of us.
You have to decide now.
Go dark with me, or try to blow this open and risk being wiped completely. Rachel didn't have time to answer. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A single message. No number attached. Just 3 words. We see you. Her blood ran cold. Cameras.
Mics.
They were still active. Before Rachel could process it, her windows shattered inward, sending shards of glass across the living room. Tactical floodlights lit up the front lawn, and the sound of heavy boots followed. Vanessa grabbed her arm and yanked her toward the back door. They're not going to arrest you, she shouted. They're going to reset you. The words sent a wave of terror through Rachel's chest. She could feel everything unraveling, her identity, her memories, her very sense of reality. Reset meant deletion. Erasure. The person she was now, the woman fighting for her daughter, piecing together truths buried in layers of lies, would be gone. In her place, just another compliant subject in a perfectly controlled life. They ran through the alley, ducking behind dumpsters as drones buzzed overhead. Vanessa led her to an underground tunnel near the drainage canal, a long-abandoned emergency shelter from decades ago, repurposed now into a temporary resistance hub. Inside were others, faces Rachel recognized from her daily life. The mailman, the waitress at the diner, a crossing guard from Emily's school. They all nodded as she entered. Survivors. Awake. A hidden network of people who had broken through the programming and were now trying to fight back. That's when Rachel truly understood. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. This was about all of them. And then she saw the wall, covered in photos, names, red string connecting one person to another. There was a section labeled Architects, and at the center was a photo of her own father. Rachel staggered backward, gasping for breath. He was one of the first scientists behind Project Marionette, Vanessa whispered. He didn't just help design it. He made you the blueprint. Rachel's vision blurred as the room tilted. The last thing she heard before blacking out was Vanessa screaming her name. And in that moment, everything shattered again. Because now the question wasn't just who she could trust. It was whether the person she had always called Dad had ever actually loved her at all. Rachel awoke to a blinding light overhead and the cold sting of restraints digging into her wrists. Her body was strapped to a medical table, and every limb felt heavy, drugged. The underground resistance bunker, the wall of names, Vanessa's panicked voice, the photo of her father at the center of the nightmare, it all flashed through her mind like static-laced fragments from someone else's memory. But this wasn't a dream. She was back in the lion's den, and she had no idea how long she'd been unconscious. The room was sterile, humming with machines she didn't recognize, and behind a glass partition stood a figure she hadn't seen in years. Dr. Harold Mason, her father. But the man staring back at her now looked colder, stripped of warmth, with a kind of expression worn by someone who had long since stopped seeing people as human. He stepped forward and pressed a button on the wall. A low-frequency hum filled the room, and Rachel's muscles jerked involuntarily. "It's a failsafe," he said calmly, as if explaining how to adjust the thermostat. "Your neural implant is still active. We didn't deactivate it completely after you deviated from protocol. You've always had a strong will, Rachel. That was part of what made you so valuable to the program." His voice was almost paternal, but the words felt sharpened at the edges. "This isn't about Emily. It was never about her. She was your anchor, the trigger to keep you emotionally invested. But you are the true subject. The primary test. The first fully immersive psychological overwrite. And you exceeded every expectation." Rachel tried to speak, but her mouth felt numb, her voice barely a whisper. Her mind was screaming. She remembered Christmas mornings, bedtime stories, long walks through the park. Every memory of her father filtered now through the sickening realization that they were part of an experiment. None of it had been real. Or maybe worse, it had been real to her, but never to him. "Why?" she finally croaked. "Why would you do this to me?" He tilted his head slightly, almost as if he pitied her. "Because this is the future. War is messy. Spies are unreliable. But psychological control? Emotional loyalty built in from childhood? That's perfect obedience. You were my proof of concept." The rage that tore through her body was enough to override the drugs, at least for a few seconds. Rachel yanked hard against the restraints, her eyes wild with fury. "Where is Emily?" she demanded, her voice hoarse. "What did you do to her?" Mason simply tapped a keypad, and a screen descended from the ceiling. It displayed a live feed. Emily, asleep in what looked like a nursery, soft music playing in the background, a woman sitting beside her humming a lullaby. "She's safe," he said, "for now. We've given her a different environment.
Clean.
Stable. She won't remember you, but she'll be happy. And that's all that matters, isn't it?" The calmness in his voice made Rachel want to tear her skin off. It wasn't just manipulation, it was control perfected. And then the room's lights flickered. A sudden crash echoed from the hallway outside. An alarm blared. The facility was under attack. Chaos erupted in the control room behind the glass as masked intruders stormed in, guns drawn. One of them tossed a flash drive to the floor beside Rachel's bed, then shot the lock on her restraints. It was Vanessa, bloodied but breathing, eyes fierce. "You still want the truth?" she said, panting. "Then come see where they built it." Rachel followed her through corridors she didn't recognize until they reached a massive underground vault. Inside were rows and rows of tanks, each containing a suspended human body, hooked up to machines, pulses visible through translucent skin. "Test subjects," Vanessa said. "They've been growing them. Cloning behavior patterns, neural mapping, emotional templates. You weren't the only prototype. You were just the one they kept close. The one they raised to believe the lie." As Rachel moved deeper into the room, she saw one tank that made her freeze. Floating inside was a perfect copy of her, same face, same scar above the eyebrow from that bike fall when she was 8. "That's not you," Vanessa said, reading her reaction. "That's the original." The realization hit her like a freight train. She wasn't born. She was made. Every memory, every feeling, every heartbreak had been programmed, implanted, tailored to test how closely artificial emotional development could mirror the real thing. The father she'd loved wasn't her creator. He was her programmer. The daughter she'd sworn to protect was never biologically hers. And yet, Rachel had loved. She had fought. She had felt, deeply, painfully, powerfully, more than a machine ever should. That's when she understood. The real failure of Project Marionette wasn't that she broke the system. It was that she became human. Outside, sirens screamed and gunfire erupted. The resistance had infiltrated the entire base. Mason's voice crackled over the speakers. "Rachel, if you destroy this, you destroy yourself. You were never meant to know. You'll lose everything.
Come home.
Let me fix this. But Rachel walked to the terminal, inserted the flash drive, and triggered the final protocol. Every hard drive, every camera, every tank, all corrupted, all erased. The system crashed around them, sending sparks through the ceiling. Rachel looked at Vanessa, who was already prepping their escape route. What happens now? She asked. Vanessa gave a tired smile. Now we live. They escaped through a maintenance tunnel just seconds before the facility self-destructed, the shockwave lighting up the night sky behind them. But just as Rachel turned to get one last look, her phone buzzed again. A new message. No number. Just 5 words. Version 3 is already active. And in that moment, Rachel realized the program had never ended. It had just moved on. Rachel sat alone at the edge of a lake that shimmered gold beneath the setting sun, the wind threading softly through her hair as if the world itself had finally exhaled. The smoke, the gunfire, the screams from the compound, those were behind her now, like echoes from someone else's nightmare. A part of her wanted to believe that she had escaped, that she had outrun the shadow cast by her past, but deep inside, she knew that some scars never fully fade. Her body still carried the memory of the wires, the needles, the code buried in her blood. And her heart, fractured but still beating, held on to questions she no longer had the strength to chase. Emily was safe now, truly safe, living with a distant relative under a new identity, far away from the ruins of Project Marionette. She wouldn't remember Rachel. The programming had ensured that. But maybe that was a gift, freedom without the weight of lies. Rachel had watched her play one last time from a distance, a smile dancing on the little girl's face as she chased bubbles in the yard, innocent and unaware of the world that had tried to use her as a pawn. The world believed the facility was destroyed, the conspiracy unraveled, and the masterminds either dead or in hiding. The media labeled it as a tragic explosion at an off-grid research center. No one questioned too much. After all, who would dare dig deeper into classified government files sealed behind layers of red tape? But Rachel had the files now, copied and secured, with names, locations, methods, all the evidence that could bring an entire network crashing down. The question was whether to use it. Vanessa thought they should leak it all. Blow the whole damn thing wide open, she'd said with fire in her eyes. Let people see what they're really funding. But Rachel wasn't sure anymore. The truth had a cost, and she'd paid it in full. For every person they exposed, there were 10 more ready to replace them. The real enemy wasn't just the agency, it was the idea that people could be built, emotions engineered, lives scripted from the womb. She often found herself looking into the mirror now, not searching for flaws, but for signs of something real, something untouched by the experiment. She'd asked herself 1,000 times, if I was created, does that make me less human? The answer had come not in words, but in choices. She'd chosen to fight, to love, to protect, to destroy the thing that made her. And in those choices, she found her humanity, messy, broken, beautiful. Her father's last words still haunted her, not because of what they revealed, but because of the tone he said them in, regret. Somewhere, buried beneath the arrogance and control, there had been love, or at least the twisted echo of it. And now he was gone, a ghost locked in her neural map, unreachable and unredeemable. One rainy morning, she received a small package at the doorstep of her temporary cabin.